Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I'm very excited.
Oh, great. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. And I have the honor and really the blessing of introducing today's presenter. If you don't know, Alida really is the world's foremost recovery coach trainer, as well as being in recovery herself. Now, Alida Schuler is the leading expert trainer and speaker and consultant for recovery coaching worldwide. Known to many as the mother of recovery coaching, she was the first recovery coach on the internet. She co-founded Recovery Coaches International and founded the first recovery coaching school. Her company provides consulting and coaching services to select treatment centers on the cutting edge who wish to be known for protecting their patients' investment in treatment. She studied art and psychology at Baruch College, briefly studied in medical school, and took courses in addiction. She studied clinical hypnotherapy at the Wellness Institute and studied energy and consciousness for 5 years under the tutelage of Reverend Jacques Matheny. Her training in life coaching came from the Academy of Coach Training. She's certified by the International Coaching Federation as a professional certified coach, has a master's in liberal science from the University of Kentucky, a bachelor's in psychology, and is certified as an advanced clinical hypnotherapist. As a founding member of Recovery Coaches International, she's worked tirelessly to develop industry standards and best practices in the recovery coach industry. Today's talk is actually going to cover current trends in addiction and recovery, 4 talks from a recovery coach. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Alida.
Okay, great. And can you all hear me? Is the level
I
sound
can.
good? Okay. All righty.
You're coming in nice and clear.
I'm gonna mute you then. Okay, thanks everyone. Okay, so this is the fourth talk, and let's get the slides clicking along here. So we have 3 that are already completed. 2 of them are up on the website, and the third will be up there soon. And you can find them at crossroadscoaching.net. So, okay, there we go. So, today I get to talk just a little bit about my sense of how we should reorganize the way that we approach addiction recovery. And I want to just start by saying a couple words about, how I got to the place where I am today. And, the factors that have really influenced me. First of all, I sobered up in 12-step recovery and have done very well with that. So I really am a strong believer in the 12-step approach and in the joys of being sober. Um, when I had about 12 years of recovery, I became a life coach. And one of the tenets of life coaching is that we follow the client's agenda. And so when I got started with recovery coaching, it occurred to me that, I was someday going to meet somebody who didn't want to do 12-step recovery. And what was I going to do? So that got me beginning to look at alternatives to 12-step. And so, I met SMART and Women for Sobriety and that kind of thing. And I also began to look at harm reduction and moderation. And I have to say, it was really, really scary to me to do that. Um, I tell you, well, my hands would nearly shake just reading about it because it was so foreign to my sense of how things ought to be, and yet I am somebody that believes in being open minded and considering things and thinking it through and making principle based decisions. And so I read and I got informed. And over time, I came to realize that it really made sense. And so some of what you're going to see today is how I think that some of these pieces would fit together in a way that would help more people sooner, and help more people stay in recovery for longer periods. Um, and so that's basically what we're going to see today. I'm one of those people who has a zillion ideas and had to narrow it down. So here we go. We're going to look at just a quick review of the problems. Some of these will be slides that you've already seen, but just to kind of ground us in where we are. And then I'm going to show you what I believe is the natural path to recovery or of recovery, that if we were to follow this, we would be able to help people get in recovery sooner. There'd be less resistance. And so basically the pieces that I'm going to suggest are really very simply about screening, brief interventions, and minimizing harm. And then I'm going to talk about coaches and ongoing recovery support. So that's what we'll be doing today. So here's our review of the problems. So we looked in the first one, we looked at addiction as a brain disease, and the thing that we have learned that sets the brain up is stress, especially childhood traumas, but really the brain, even if you have a healthy brain growing up, you expose somebody to enough trauma and their brain will organically change. So really the worst outcome is going to be being raised in an environment that is really stressful to a baby. Oops, this is starting to go on to its own. I wonder why. Hold on. Maybe something. Okay. Um hope I just can't tell if this has decided to take off on its own, but anyway, the worst thing is that when an infant's brain is stressed, it looks different. It doesn't have the same number of synapses and all of that, and it's basically a setup for being someone whose brain is going to want dopamine, and when it gets dopamine, is going to uh, start the disease process by imprinting it heavily and putting it in the hierarchy of survival so that drugs or dopamine is preferred over anything else. So all of that, and I'm not quite sure. I just want to. I'm gonna. Whoops. I'm gonna go to the slide I wanted to. Um, okay. So all right, this will be fine. So anyway, what we know happens is that 60% of the people who have chemical dependency problems end up with mental health problems. So some of those common problems involve some variation on dissociation. So, almost all of the things that are considered mental health problems are related to dissociation in some way. But anyway, you've got quite a nice collection of problems here that are, a lot of these really are brain problems, and even the behavior problems end up being brain problems. Um, and when you add it all up, you can also add in kind of social health problems that are also associated. So I've added in hepatitis, tuberculosis, and HIV. So these are the common problems that we need to deal with in concurrently or in addition to the actual physical addictions. Again, almost half the population either has the disease or addiction or uses drugs in a risky manner. And so that, for me, one of the things that I think is important is that we begin to include these people who have not been diagnosed, and may not be in a place where they are, ready to be labeled, or they're probably not really going to opt for abstinence as their first choice of how to deal with things. And that's, almost 32% of the US population that does risky use, not to mention the other 400 million people who have the disease of addiction. Okay, we just, again, the costs are astronomical, and wouldn't it be nice if we could lower that $600 billion number? So again, we've dealt with the disease of addiction as a forensic problem. We've we've started a literal war in the sense of arrest and jail, but we also, in some ways, we have what I see and really concerns me is the way in which this belief system about addicts as being bad people um, even slips into the language that we use as chemical dependency counselors, for instance. I hear chemical dependency counselors say, he admitted or he claimed, and they just sort of they pick up the language of sort of a courtroom almost, and I believe that's part of our um, of our cultural war on our own citizens. So I'm really hoping that this kind of thing stops, and some of the things that I want to suggest, I I hope will begin to change some of this. So I'm pretty sure that there really is a more natural path to recovery, and that it does it. I think it might be common sense. So let's take a look at it. So I think that the pattern that occurs is somebody, has a stressful life, they have life problems, they have a stressed brain, and they begin to use drugs to cope. And boy, their brain says, "Wow, this is great. I feel so much better. Thank you. I love this. Let's make a note of how we got this and where to find it." And then the disease pattern starts up, the cravings, the obsession, the risky behaviors, and we move into you know not only problems, because using drugs doesn't solve the life problems, so we have those problems, and now we have problems specifically related to our brain's demand for the drug, and it may be illegal, it may be hard to get, it may be very expensive, um, and so you can have problems just trying to control your use or trying to obtain drugs. So what I see happen is that we spend we don't do very much to recognize problems with drug use early along, and we wait until they're already in trouble for drug related problems, um, and then once we get them, we try to tell them that the only choice that they have is abstinence. So um, so I'm going to go, and I'm going to probably go back and forth for a minute between this slide and the next. So the next slide is going to be your friend, the stages of change. And what I'm going to suggest is very simply that this is going to do its little slide, a little round and round. So people who are using drugs and enjoying it, even though it may be harmful to them, are people who truly do not know that they have a problem. And that's the definition of pre-contemplation. Pre-contemplation is not denial, it's ignorance. Because somebody may be fully aware that they have a problem and still not want to do anything about it, and 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 that you know they may be in the early stages of contemplation, but anyway, Miller really suggests that people often that most of us meet very few people in pre-contemplation, and that we mistake disagreeing with us for that stage when really they're not in that. But anyway, so in that, what we typically do is we are trying to get people who are in pre-contemplation. We'll skip to contemplation. We get people who are in contemplation. They may be aware that they have a problem, but they haven't decided that they want to do anything about it, and we put them in treatment for abstinence-based treatment. And to me, this doesn't make sense, because what that means is that we spend a great deal of time in a treatment setting trying to motivate people to be willing to stop using drugs. And I think that if we give them the option of starting somewhere other than abstinence, that they sort out whether they're good at that or not. And then when they're in treatment, we could use that time to help them be able to stay in recovery instead of using that time to motivate them. So I'm going to go back for just one moment. Okay, so the next section is about screening and brief interventions and harm reduction. And where it fits in with this is very simply that if we were doing screening for alcohol problems and other drug problems, when we encounter people who have life problems, or people that we somehow notice are using more drugs, which of course includes alcohol, than might be expected, that we would be able to become aware of that ever so much sooner, rather than waiting until they are in trouble and having problems. And even then, most people, in the thousands of alcoholics and addicts that I've met in my life, almost all of them went through a period of trying to control their use. And in terms of the stages of change, that was a pre-contemplation. I mean, that was a contemplation time. We were having troubles. We wanted the troubles to stop. We weren't sure whether they were related to drugs or not. We weren't sure we wanted to give them up. We wanted to give them up in the morning. By evening, we wanted to use again. And the problem with contemplation is that it can go on for years and years and years. I think I probably spent maybe 7 years trying to figure out how to drink properly, and I wasn't very effective at it, as many of us aren't. But had you asked me if I wanted to quit at the beginning of those 7 years, I would have said no. I'm not. I'm just trying how to figure out how to do this better. Um, but if you had said, would you like to learn how to do this more safely with fewer problems, I would have been all in favor of that. So, let's move into the next section. So again, just the idea is that people have a natural period of trying to manage their drug problems or alcohol problems, and my point is, if they were helped to do that, they might find out in 6 months or 6 weeks whether they were able to do it or not, and not spend the years and years and years that happens when we are waiting till they really get in trouble or really ready to say uncle. Okay, we're moving past that. Okay. And so this is this slide. Let's see if it's gonna. Oh, it's gonna go slow. I'm gonna click fast. At some point, they'll all jump in. Oh well. I thought I'd tamed all my slides, but I picked one up from an earlier talk. Okay. So again, I believe that people get alienated when we start trying to tell them what the problem is, when we tell them that their only choice is abstinence. If they disagree with us, we tell them that they're in denial. We ignore progress or changes or efforts that fall short of abstinence, and they get alienated when all um, of everything we're talking about is just about abstinence and not drinking. So we'll see as in the last section that coaches um, really do let the client decide what the problem is and what their goal is. We start with them where they want to start. We support positive change, um, and we do ask them to make distinct changes. But anyway, let's move into screening here. So screening is not the same as diagnosis, and screening is like a broad net, and it is so broad that it is possible to get false positives, which means you've captured somebody and said you have a problem when really they don't. And it also is possible. It's also a screening tool may have false negatives. It may um, it may fail to capture somebody who should have been identified. So they are not a diagnosis. And the thing about a screening tool is that anyone can do screening. You don't have to be licensed to ask a question like this. And so this question, how many times in the last year have you had 5 or more drinks in a day? That single question identified 86% of the individuals who had an alcohol use in a study that Miller quotes in his book, Treating Addiction. Um, just so you know, if you're talking to women who are biologically different than men in terms of how they process alcohol, you would want to ask them how many times in the last year have you had 4 or more drinks in a day. But anyway, so there are a lot of different screening tools, and um, it's funny because people don't use them because they think it makes it's impolite or it's uncomfortable, but they really if what people mostly hear when you are talking to them, they hear your tone, they hear whether you care about them, they hear whether you're on their side. And so if you can have a soft approach, you can use these sorts of things. There's any number of them, and some of them are easier to use and shorter than others. There's even a short mast. But I want to give you an example of someone that I worked with recently. This is a young man that I met. I am on a harm reduction list serve, and everybody's typing in about how many drinks they had and whether how many days of abstinence they had and that kind of thing. And sometimes we have guests who are coached in our class, and this young man was one of our guests. And he disappeared for a while, um, and then he came back and he said he'd been drinking heavily. And when we asked some questions about that, it turned out he'd been drinking really heavily. And so I talked with him, and it turned out it wasn't in class because It was really a very long conversation. And I asked him whether he'd be interested in learning how to control his drinking. And he said, yeah. And so, in preparation for that, I asked him if he would like to know what the odds were of him being able to successfully do that. And so I had William R. Miller's book, Controlling Your Drinking, which has the masked alcohol screening tool in it, and another one. And so this young man and I went through those things really slowly, and then I was able to report to him that he fell into the group of drinkers who most commonly went to treatment, and that in Miller's experience, and he's of course dealt with thousands upon thousands of problem drinkers, not one who scored as high on the mass as he did had ever been able to successfully moderate their drinking. So, um, so that was, that was the result. And what as because of that conversation, last time I heard from this fellow, which was last week, he hadn't had a single drink since we had talked. So he was impressed. But anyway, so these are tools that anyone can use. You don't have to be licensed. You're not doing a diagnosis, and but they will let somebody know. They'll help somebody understand where they are and whether they might need more help, and you can then refer them to a chemical dependency counselor for a full assessment. Um, but it opens the door for information. Okay, so there are a couple of books that I really like screening tools. So here are some that I use fairly often. The Mood Cure is really for depression and anxiety. The blahs are sort of the ADHD kind of thing where your brain doesn't quite work very well. And hypersensitivity is often related to thyroid problems, low cortisol. But anyway, the pardon me, the the solutions that she has are all brain chemistry things. They're basically the amino acids that are the precursors to the neurotransmitters. And so if you have enough, if you have the right neurotransmitters in your brain, then you have enough serotonin and dopamine and that kind of thing. Uh, Najavit's book has, and these are all self-reporting, all of these screening things, you're asking that person to answer those questions. And so it is not relying on your trained observations, you're just simply asking the questions. And anyway, so Najavitz is doing that for personalities disorder, bipolar, that kind of thing. So it's if you think somebody might have a particular um, mental health problem, that's a good book. Except she doesn't. She really is only looking at the things that are common to women, so it skips antisocial personality disorder, for instance. But anyway, okay, controlling your drinking has several um, good screening tools in it. That one of them is a mass, and the other one I think uh, is one that suggests whether you might have troubles with withdrawals. Anyway, so screening tools are your friend, and not only that, but they're also, what I believe every doctor, every teacher, every officer, the police officer, military officer, I mean, I think everybody should be able to ask these simple questions and give somebody the information that would give, because many people don't know. I mean, they really do not know. Okay, so I'll, let's see. Here then, so I love this study. This was started by a trauma surgeon named Gentilello, and he worked at Harborview in Seattle, and he was somebody who did, emergency room in a public hospital in a big city, and, spent every hour dealing with the results of accidents and car wrecks and falling off buildings and all of those things. And he, pretty clearly saw that most of the people that he was working on were intoxicated. Okay, so he did a large study. This is a very, very good study, and it's a very good study because it was long. It involved a lot of people, and they were able to, because this was a public hospital, they were able to track these trauma care patients um, over time, see whether they showed up in jails, see whether they showed up in other emergency rooms. I mean, he really got a lot of bang for his buck out of starting to do this. But anyway, so in this one single study, they had two groups, a brief intervention group and a control group. And at 12 months, the group that received brief intervention, so this means they were screened for alcohol. Everybody here was screened for alcohol. Half of them got brief intervention and half of them didn't. Those who did had decreased their alcohol consumption by an average of 21.8 standard drinks per week. The control group, which was also screened but didn't have any intervention, also decreased their drinking, but that decrease was only a drop of 6.7 drinks per week. Okay, so, but there was a 47% reduction in injuries requiring either emergency or department or trauma center admissions, and a 48% reduction in injuries requiring hospital admissions in the group that had received a brief intervention. So brief interventions are, I think that, William R. Miller, my hero, has been one of the people who developed a number of those. A lot, some of the ones that, they are basically applying some information, um, a little direction, and some motivational interviewing. You can get a free book on how to do that, how to do brief interventions from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. The book that you want is Tip 34, and it's free. So if any of you want to learn how to do this, that's a good, really good free resource. The other thing that Gentilello said uh, was that for every dollar the hospital spent on having somebody in the emergency room who could do these assessments, um, the screening, the I should have said screening, to do the screenings and the briefing, and then follow up with brief interventions, which are visits, but it's a short term thing. For every dollar they spent on that, they saved somewhere, I can't remember, it was $6 or $8, but it was really a surprising amount, uh, just simply in the reduction of having those people show up again in the emergency room. And that's, because that's uh, people who are intoxicated are heavy users of those services. And so those screening and interventions really changed their behaviors. And there was one guy, he showed us a clip. There was one kid that they'd gone back and seen, and there he is. He's sitting on his porch. He's got a case of beer beside you, and you go, "Oh God, this guy there's no help here." But he looked and he went, "No," he said, I don't drink and drive anymore. Every time I even think about it, I see Dr. Genitello's face." And he said, "I give my car keys to the neighbor as soon as I get back from the liquor store." So even for people who may not stop their their drug behaviors, they may have safer use. So which is a good way of starting to talk about uh, harm reduction, which is, just simply things that we can do to minimize harm and to increase safety. So there are, people have very strong emotional feelings about harm reduction. And I think, for me, for instance, as an abstinent 12 stepper, I was fine with seatbelt laws and drunk driving laws, but I started to get and I'm all in favor of safe sex, but I get a little nervous when we start talking about needle exchanges and safe injections and wet shelters. And these are all the public ones. There's also really harm reduction has also become something that's done as a psychotherapy with individuals. But nonetheless, sometimes I think that our nervousness about some of these things prevents us from just, honestly accepting that as much as we would like it, and as much as we all know that the safest thing is abstinence, that not everyone is going to opt for abstinence. And even some people who want abstinence are not able to achieve it. So there's some sort of basic things that um, harm reduction talks about. This is, really some of the original stuff. I think it was by a guy named Zinberg. I started with SET. This came out in the 1960s when all of my generation was using excessive amounts of drugs, and so SET referred to mindset because they knew that mindset had a lot to do with your LSD trip. But anyway, um, it really means the person. So any variables that relate to that person that are changeable are things you can consider in terms of minimizing harm. So someone might decide, um, I'm not going to smoke cigarettes when I get in a fight with my wife or drink or my spouse. Well, I'm not going to use. I won't use when I'm angry, or I won't get behind the wheel of a car. So there in SET, there's any number of things that you can change. With drugs, this is talking about uh, mode of use. Are you using needles? Are you using clean needles? Are you snorting? Are you smoking crack? Is there a safer way to use that drug? Um, and I think about this a lot because I live in an area that where our supply of heroin is from the Mexican mafia, and they give awful quality heroin. So we get all kinds of huge, ghastly abscesses that are really unheard of on the East Coast, where they get China White, a much higher grade of higher quality drug, and so you just don't get some of the health problems that you get when you get your opiates from Mexico, black tar heroin. Um, Setting has to do with the environment. And so, if you are trying to shoot up on the street and you're afraid that you might get caught, you might not take the time to clean the needle, clean the site, do the things that prevent the spread of hepatitis, especially. Or if you are drinking, are you in a safe setting? Are you drinking at home with people who are kind to you? Or are you out in a bar where you might get picked up by somebody, who knows? But so setting has a lot to do with being able to minimize harm. So those are some of the ways that people who look at harm reduction think about minimizing harm from drug use. One other thing I just want to say is that harm reduction includes uh, safer use, it includes moderation, and it includes abstinence as one of the options. So here's some statistics from Miller, our motivational interviewing guy who wrote the book Controlling Your Drinking. So these were studies that were um, reviewed by an outside agency, and so it's nicely done research. These are the results of people who were taught on skills on how to control their drinking. So 1 in 7 was able to maintain complete moderation in the previous year. So they never had more than 3 drinks in a day, and they averaged only 10 drinks per week. So 1 in 4 was able to reduce their drinking to an average of 14 drinks a week, but they still had some alcohol related problems, which probably meant that they didn't keep their blood alcohol level in the suggested range because they drank too much too fast, which he's taught them how not to do that, but they did that. And but if you've averaged only 14 drinks per week, that is probably significantly less than what they were doing before. The other interesting result is that 1 in 4 decided to choose abstinence. And so they didn't come saying I want to be abstinent, but they decided that it wasn't fun to control your drinking and keep it in a safe range, it wasn't worth it, or they weren't good at it, or it was too much trouble. But for whatever the reason, they opted for abstinence and had maintained that in the previous year. And then there's that sad group, which unfortunately was the largest single group, but who continued to drink at problem levels. But still, those are fairly good outcomes. And again, it's just important to remember that just because you haven't insisted on abstinence at the beginning, that you're not going to mention it or include it as one of the options, and it's always the safest option. Okay, so just again, we're looking at just a review. We've looked at some various screening tools. We know screening is not diagnosis, that you don't have to be licensed to do it. You know where to get a tip 34 if you want to learn more about how to do brief interventions. And that really there are a variety of options that you can offer someone about how they might change their behaviors. And basically, I believe that if we do these things, then someone who's entering treatment ought to be entering it because they want to be able to learn how to stay abstinent. 90% of the treatment centers in the United States are abstinence based. But wouldn't it be great if the people who were coming in were ready to learn what it takes to stay in recovery, instead of having to use that time to be motivated? So anyway, those are my thoughts. Um, so this may change over time, but we know that the relapse rates are truly dismal, and God only knows what this slide's going to do. Um, Let me go back. I think if I leave my thing sitting on the thing, it makes it go forward. The addiction in the past has been treated as an acute problem, so that's why you had 28 days, and then you were expected to be able to stay in recovery, sober, abstinent for the rest of your life. We know now that it's not an acute problem. It's a lifestyle. It's a chronic problem. It requires lifestyle changes. Lifestyle changes take longer um, to learn how to do. I don't really like it when people define addiction as a relapsing disease. I think it just may be a challenge that you may not be able to perfect the first time. But I don't believe when people say it's part of, it's normal, it's part of recovery to relapse. I don't believe that it is necessarily normal. I think it happens a lot because we have forced people who were in who really weren't ready for action into action and into abstinence before they were ready. So there's that. And then if we're spending all the time in treatment motivating them, they don't get enough time learning how to stay in recovery. Okay. But in any event, if we can get people, you know, to stabilize and keep them stable with support for 5 years, people say, almost all of them will make it to 10 years, and they won't need the same amount of support. But this is the whole piece with peer recovery coaching and professional recovery coaching is how are you providing support for people after they've left your treatment program? So I'm pretty sure that life in recovery needs to be more rewarding than drug use. We know the brain already thinks drug use is very rewarding. Recovery has to be better than that. And so, you know, it anyway, it needs to be something that's attractive. So I think, and speaking on behalf of recovery life coaches, um, coaches, professional coaches view recovery as something that is naturally attractive. We don't, attraction, not promotion. It really is attractive, and it occurs when there's the possibility of being able to, believe that you can have some of the things you want, that you can be successful, that you can change your life, um, that things can be better. I mean, so that hope, and when they're able to see that, and it's definitely a process. People will start by saying, I just want to feel better, I just don't want to have a hangover, I just don't want to be in jail. But one of the things we can do as a life coach is help people reframe that. So if you didn't have a hangover, you'd have, oh, health. Okay, I'd be healthier. Yeah. So what you want is to feel better. You want to, So we're going through that process of helping them create a vision of what their life could be like. We're connecting the dots with how drug use has or will interfere with achieving the success they want. So they've gotten clear about what they want, what it would look like, what it would feel like, and the nice thing is that having done that, a professional coach can then help them figure out what goals can you set up that would reach that outcome, what action steps can you take, and so they know that they have this ongoing support to be successful. And I think that makes a huge difference. I wish I could tell you that every one of my clients has achieved 100% success in abstinence, but it's not true. But most of them have done really, really well. And one of them has gone into treatment for the X number of times, so keeps me learning. So professional recovery coaches can actually, provide resources, or referrals, or help, or tools or techniques to work with really a surprising number of the problems that people who are suffering from addictions face. So we know that those cravings are also associated with risky behaviors. That helps you go out and get that drug. That's what the brain is hardwired in. So, one of the things I really am working on with my clients is not just how do you get to detox and all of that, but how do you support your brain so that you have the building blocks, so you can have the neurotransmitters, so that you can actually feel good. And so that's one of the things that is it's just something I do with pretty much every client. Um, Peer coaches probably are doing more than I do in terms of helping people get connected with housing and local resources, but I can help someone find a peer coach. And again, that's one of the things that I work with is how do you find the things that you need or want to stay in recovery, and that may be a peer coach, may be a big help. Um, so one of the gaps that I believe exists and also exists in treatment, because mental health was sort of divorced from chemical dependency for so long, we don't really do enough in terms of helping people not not necessarily resolve their issues, but learn to manage them, because I think management is what people need, unless they actually have such interfering problems as intrusive thoughts or flashbacks or that kind of thing. I'm not somebody that recommends working on your primary trauma issues in early recovery, because I think it takes a lot of stability to face that stuff, and people don't have that yet. But there are things that people can do that help them learn to manage the voices in their head. Some of that is parts work, internal family systems. Jay Early does self therapy, very helpful. There's also ACT, that kind of thing. Um, Learning how to move out of the to stay in the higher part of your brain, to be able to get in and out of um, kind of flooding and adrenaline. That's one of the things I work with and teach my students how to do. When people are flooded with adrenaline, they're in the part of the brain that's wired to seek drugs. How can you get somebody out of that? Um, so anyway, and then, I mean, this doesn't even include all the things that people want in order to be successful. They want to go back to school, they want to have good relationships, they want to learn how to be better parents. And that variety of things are things that professional coaches, some of them specialize in particular aspects of it, but they've learned a set of skills that is can help pretty much any client do better at communication and that parenting and all of that. Okay. So a coach is going to, we do a lot of brainstorming, and it really depends on what our client's goal is. We'll brainstorm, successful abstinence. What would that look like? How would you get it? What are your thoughts? What do you think you need to do? What did drugs do for you? And now you need to find a healthy substitute for that. In What things should you avoid? And just, what are the patterns that will help you stay in recovery? The halt, or as my friend says, halts, because she adds hungry, angry, lonely, tired, sick for things to watch out for. But anyway, so we'll do that. Um, we'll, how do you get abstinent? How do you stay in recovery? Because it's a different set of skills to maintain something as it is to achieve it. And what are the ongoing supports and structures that you're going to want to create in your life and learn how to do, so that um, and what the old AA saying was, there's a finance and romance are the two major causes of slips. So managing your finances, relationships, that kind of thing, all of that are pieces that we'll work on. If somebody relapses, which, as we know, happens, or if they are somebody who um, hasn't yet achieved sobriety or may not want it, then I want to make sure that they are going to stay safe. If they've relapsed, I'm like everybody else. I'm going to see how we can get them back in recovery, into abstinence and recovery as soon as we can. But I also will brainstorm, if you're going to be using, how do you do it safely? So there's some good research out here on not specifically on professional recovery coaching. I wish we had it, but we don't yet. I do know I know that Hazelden and um, is offering coaching now because they track treatment outcomes, they track relapse, and have for a long, long time, and they have some information on what the difference is. They haven't issued any research on it. The original research was really inverse their relapse rate, but they don't like me to talk about it because it was too small a study, but it had very good outcomes. So, really pretty much all of these are all professional coaching research pieces. So health coaching, lots of basic things that improved, that make people happier. There was a huge piece, there was a huge piece that I'm not going to put up here, but this was done in the Navy through the Prevent program, and um, that used a lot of coaching. And I'm pretty sure you may be able to find that research, but in any event, the Navy was so pleased with that with how coaching did in their Prevent program, that they bought the More program from Hazelden, and it's now in the Navy. So the Navy's done lots of coaching, and they do it because it works. So let's see. ADHD coaching is another sort of specialty form of recovery coaching, and that also has some good outcomes in terms of, what basically the students who had ADHD were able to stay in college, make better grades, and enjoy, a better social life when they had help from a coach. So this is our last slide, and I'm going to read you this quote. This is from William Miller. Addictions are highly treatable, and a variety of effective treatment methods are available. When people who have developed alcohol drug dependence recover, they really recover. You don't need subtle psychological measures to see the change. They look better, they feel better, their family and social functioning tends to improve, they are healthier and happier, they fare better at work, school, and play, and contrary to public opinion, most of them do recover. And that's been my experience as a recovery coach, is that most of my clients do recover. So thank you very much. I'm going to stick around for our quick review. We looked at problems associated with addiction, a natural path. We looked at screening, brief introductions, and minimizing harm. And we looked at some of the ways that professional recovery coaches provide ongoing, as long as somebody needs or wants it, support for recovery. So anyway, I'm going to stick around and um, see if anybody has questions. Again, and also I'm happy to answer any questions about the upcoming training. And so what I have learned is that some of you have mics, some of you don't. And let's see, I'm going to put everybody's hands down. And actually, so this is where it's always a little tricky. So I'm going to assume that if you have a question mark, you may have a question. And so let me start. The other thing is, if you have a question and you cannot talk to me because you don't have a mic, then you'll need to type. So here we go. I'm going to start at the top here. Let's see. All right, I've got one here. I'm going to start with Eva and see if she has a question or not. Eva, do you have a question? Okay, that means that that person does not. I think she was somebody who didn't have a mic last week. Eva, if you have a question, you'll need to type it in and I will get it from you at that time. Deborah Smith, you are unmuted.
Thank you. Okay. I'd love to say something.
Yes.
Great. Alida, you've really got a big, beautiful global picture of a situation, that so many in this recovery world are just drowning in. And I'm hoping that you're going to take this to treatment centers and instill the idea because you've really got something wonderful going on here. Thank you for doing this today.
Oh, okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, that was not a question. Okay. Let me try, let's see. I gotta figure out who I've already tried. Okay, I'm gonna try Jennifer Manwell. Jennifer, okay. Do you have a question? Okay. I muted her. She has a lot of background noise. Okay. Uh, Patricia Sanez. Sings. Do you have a question? Wait a second. Let's see. Okay, I'm just looking to see if anybody's written anything. Slides are moving too fast. What do you recommend? Here's a question. What do you recommend we offer as coaches that work with and beyond the 12 steps? What if people don't want spiritual help? There's not any, half the people who achieve recovery do it in ways other than the 12 steps. So that may or may not, that is all the other ways. So 12 steps is the single most successful one, but half the people use other things. And they use, some people use their family. Sometimes they do it on their own. They're just able to make a decision to stop drinking or using, and they do. Um, and so, and if they don't want spiritual help, I was raised by atheists, and what I can tell you is just because people don't believe in God per se doesn't mean that they don't have morals or ethics or things that they care very deeply about. And those are the things you want to find out what they are, and how does their use, how can those things help them, figure out how to deal with this. Um, what people have inspired them, who do they admire, what qualities do they have. So those are the kinds of things that I'm looking for when somebody doesn't believe in a higher power. And yeah, I don't think it's really a problem necessarily. Because they're human. They still love people. They still care about things. They still they're not really that different. Okay, so I just have found out that people have been typing in. Here's a question. I'm going to see what Cassandra asked. Okay, let me know. I will, Cassandra, I'm going to unmute you. Hang on one moment. Okay, Cassandra, you're on.
Okay, hi, Alida. Thanks. Great presentation. My question is about perception, I guess, for the professional recovery coach. How would you describe the impact or the effect of the peer coach um, on the perspective of the professional coach?
I really love peer coaching, and I mean I think it's a really really important and good service. It grew up in a grassroots movement, basically with people coming out of the public sector, uh, places that deal with addiction, which, as we know, is often prisons and jails, and then there's been some public treatment programs and that kind of thing, and with that population of people, they've developed a set of skills that is really dealing with some of the most important immediate needs. Um, Professional recovery coaching came from a really different place. It came out of life coaching. It came from business coaching, and all of that. So I think that peer coaching has increased the interest in life coaching. Quite frankly, because people are googling recovery coaching, they don't necessarily know what they're looking for yet. Um, and I also, I don't know whether over time these will become more similar. I suspect they will. I do know that professional coaches have a skill set that is far beyond the skill set that peer coaches have, and one of the ways that you can see that difference is that peers talk about coming from their lived experience, that their experience as somebody in recovery and how they did it and what helped them is one of the main things they have to offer. A professional coach has, you know, many of my students have been in recovery, some haven't, but they have, most of them have that lived experience, and then they have this incredible skill set in questioning, reflection, reframing, brainstorming, accountability, all of that. And so I think some of it's just a matter of time before people really understand the differences and who's going to want what and who's going to need what when. I hope that
I think
answers it.
my question really is, when people are googling recovery coaching, but when they get it, um, the first couple of pages is basically full of the references to the peer coach, and we're using the same name. So I guess my concern is professionally. Is there? Would you recommend using a different kind of name so that people would know that it's
You,
not just
you
the
can call
peer coach?
yourself a
Because you're right.
professional coach and, a professional life coach. It's a great question, Cassandra. I'm going to just take a few more, though, because I
Okay.
don't know that we'll solve it here.
Okay.
Thanks. Let's see. Um, anyway, let's see. Oops. So I think that I don't know if there's any other questions today. If there's any questions about the training, let's see what I can hear bells. Yes, I can. Just oh, ah. I'm just looking to see if there's any other questions. Um, so someone's asked, when does the next class start? I'm going to start the next class. I'm actually going to move this one out a little bit, and so I'm going to start it in September. And I've been doing interviews for that, and it's filling up nicely. But there are a few slots left. So if you're interested in interviewing for that, just send me an email, coachalida@gmail.com, and we'll set up, just to see whether this is the right program for you, whether this is a good fit. Um, and let's see. So I think that's probably it. If anybody has a last question, I don't know how to make all the questions disappear. Ah, I see. There we go. Okay. So thanks everyone. Appreciate all of you for coming and spending the time here today. I hope that you take what you have here. These will be, most of them will be up on my site. Let other people know about them. If you know anyone who's interested in training them, please refer them. And but most of all, if anything, I would like you to treat people who are dealing with addictions more kindly, and offer them more options, and see if they don't get healthier faster. Okay, thanks so much. Bye, everybody.